Welcome to Organized, the Business Law Breakdown. I'm your host, Seth C. Oranburg, Professor of Law at the University of New Hampshire, Franklin Pierce School of Law, and I'm the Director on the Program on Organizations, Business, and Markets at NYU's Classical Liberal Institute. Today, I'm thrilled to host a special edition of the podcast sponsored by the UNH Law Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, where we are celebrating First Generation College Students Day. I'm honored to be joined by three special guests, lawyers and faculty members who are the first in their families to graduate college or law school. We'll be exploring their journeys, challenges, and offering advice for other first-generation students who are navigating the world of higher education and law. Joining us today are Ed Timberlake, Professor of Law at UNH Franklin Pierce School of Law, known for his work on trademark law and his passionate advocacy for student success. Kara Simard, Professor and Interim Director of Legal Residencies at UNH Franklin Pierce School of Law, who has played a pivotal role in fostering diversity within legal education. And Cassandra Larae-Perez, Professor and Clinic Director at UNH Franklin Pierce School of Law, who brings her unique perspective as the first person in her family to graduate college and an advocate for social justice in the legal field. Thank you for all joining me here today. To get started, I want to ask you a more basic question, which is, what does it mean to be a first-generation student? Because I don't think this term is super well defined. And so we get an opportunity before we explore how your identities fit in with whatever that means to determine what that means to us and to our listeners. So I'll start with you, Kara, if you would. What is your perspective on what it means to be first gen? And particularly, what does it mean in the law?
A good question. Since I don't know specifically what it really means, it wasn't something I had really thought much about until more recently. I guess I can only speak from my experience, but for me, my parents did not go to college. And so in that sense, I was a first generation college student. And my parents and no one in my family had been to law school. So I was the first in my family to go to law school and graduate with an advanced degree. And so to me, that I guess I was the first in my family to do these things, although I did have a sister who was a year older than me. So she went before me. And I think when I was in school growing up, I thought because my sister went before I did, I wasn't first generation because she did it first. But, I guess from what I understand today, it's really because my parents and no one else in my family had been through there before me.
Ed, what's your perspective on first gen? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so I guess in my case, it wouldn't be first gen in the same sense since my father went to college, but nobody in the family had ever been to law school, and we didn't really know any lawyers. So starting law school was wholly different than there wasn't really any example for that. So that's kind of how I would define it.
Cassandra, what does first gen law mean in particular? So does that mean, well, what does it mean to you? And how does a person determine whether or not they, qualify? You heard Kara saying she even questioned whether she felt that identity was appropriate. What do you think it means?
I can't define it for anyone else. For myself, neither of my parents had graduated college until I had already gone. Each of them had their challenges or barriers that were related to discrimination, but I don't want to, that's their story to tell. But I will say my father attended college and didn't finish it, and there's some discriminatory reasons for that. He later went on to become very successful in his business as an electrician. And then my mother only had, I'm not even sure if it was a high school diploma or an equivalence, because she was pregnant with me when she was in just finishing high school. She did go to college, and she now has 2 master's degrees. So I do have college educated people in my family, but it came after I had gone. No one else went to law school. There's no one in my family, even my extended family, who went to law school. There was one second or third cousin that became a doctor. There are people in the family later, younger generations, who went to college. But when I went and my cousin went, we were the only two that I'm aware of in the extended family that had gone to college.
I'm going to dive into, by the way, those stories, but before I even get into the stories about what inspired you to kind of overcome the gap between what your family had done and what you have accomplished, which I think will be helpful for a lot of students who are thinking about that. I'm kind of wondering out loud why we have a first generation day. And Cassandra, you did mention discrimination, right? And one of the reasons we have some of these holidays and why we on the DEI committee try to amplify certain voices is we know that there are certain perspectives or identities or backgrounds that find challenge. So are there challenges that first gen people experience? Can we talk a little bit before we go further about why we have a first gen day at all? Because, I'm a person who doesn't identify this way. I come from a background with professionals in the family. My grandfather had a law firm. He graduated Drexel Night School, and I'm proud of that. But, on the GI Bill, and we all have our stories, but mine's not a first gen story. So, Kara, do you have some perspectives, either from your own life or from working with students, around why we might celebrate first gen students and why we might need to help amplify those voices?
Yeah, I mean, I think just kind of relying on my own experience when I was applying to colleges and then ultimately law schools, I didn't have anyone in my family who had done that before. And so they couldn't really provide that guidance that I think, a lot of, students going off to higher education are looking for, as far as what schools would be best for me and what I should be looking for in a school and in an education. And so, I was really navigating that from my own perspective, and I didn't really have a lot of guidance, and I didn't grow up with friends with lawyers as parents, or some of my friends had parents who were college educated, but most of them worked in the trades, so not in office environments. And so, it was really just that understanding where to go and what to look for and what kind of questions to ask. And I didn't really have that kind of guidance. And so I think that's one area, is really, having somebody who's been through it, who can talk you through what to expect, um, and what might be best for you, personally. And then once you're, in school, like, I relied on my peers a lot for a lot of information, because I didn't have, people in my life who had been through it before me to go to with questions. And so I found that the support of my peers was really important and helpful to me when I was in college and when I was in law school as well, to help me navigate. And I think probably I came to a lot of things maybe slower than some people did, as far as knowing when to start looking for summer positions and internships and where to find those, and how to go about doing that. And those were really figuring out what kind of law I wanted to practice or lawyer I wanted to be. That really all, I think, came later for me, because I didn't know a lot about the field at all to rely on, or for that perspective. And so I think, from my personal experience, I would just say it's sort of having that, recognizing that some people need more guidance and more support when they're in that type of an environment, because you don't have the family or the friends or the, people in your life to rely on for it. And so I think, coming together to recognize that and to go out of our way to provide that kind of support is really important.
Cassandra, how about you? Do you think there's an importance to having a first gen day? And can you speak a little more to why we're here in honor of it, and why you're here? What is the importance to you of recognizing this identity, or this first generation concept?
And to piggyback a little bit on what Kara just said, I think the importance is to develop and find community. And Kara was talking about not only her family, but her community around her didn't have the college experience. I had a similar history, in that people in my high school, they didn't go to college. So you didn't have the expectations that you would be preparing for college. It wasn't the circumstance where everyone in school was saying, oh, I'm running to take, in our day, the ACT, or nobody was pushing each other, preparing together for college entry. And without that, you don't have the support. It's not just family, it's your community too. And if you don't have that support or that shared experience on your way to college, many people won't continue on to college because they don't know the steps they need to take. And then once there, or once in law school, they don't have that baseline of understanding that may have been available when they were growing up. So the importance of a day like this is to recognize the individuals who have found their way through, but also perhaps to develop a community in order to provide that support that was lacking in their way to this point.
Ed, can you talk a little bit about the community you found yourself in growing up? I want to hear more about your story. So, you're here as a lawyer. You're one of the, and you can get the number, but there are very few people who have the trademark specialization that you do. So you didn't just achieve a law degree, but you went on to substantial specialization in law. And you mentioned that you weren't surrounded with this kind of community. Can you share a little bit about your background and about how you got from there to here?
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of accidental. Probably that I was out of college when I pretty much just got hit on the head with the concept of trademarks. It just became a very interesting area. Had never thought about trademarks before, never thought about law before, and kind of got obsessed with that subject matter. So I, even just coming to law school was kind of informed by that experience. Like, all right, well, what do people who are already, what do grown-ups who are obsessed with trademarks, how do they function? What do they do? How do they cope? And it seemed like law was kind of the central area where you could do that. So even at the beginning of law school, it was guided by, I just want to learn everything I can about that, which in a way helps because, the law school, especially the first year or two, is, pretty baffling in a lot of ways. But if you have kind of this other thing that you're going for, you're like, all right, well, this is just a stepping stone so that I can spend all day thinking about trademarks. It's nice to have that end goal in mind, but it wasn't, to the extent that I would have looked around and seen examples of people who were lawyers, those are not always pretty examples. Those are not always, that doesn't always look fun. They don't always look like they're terribly happy with their profession. So it wasn't that kind of exposure that said, oh, I think I want to wear pinstripes. It was more, no, I want to do this. I want to focus on this particular subject matter. And if I might just add to the notion of having a specific day, at least as it relates to law school, people who are the first generation going to law school, I think we can just recognize that law school is hard for everybody, but it feels like maybe it's differently hard if you have no frame of reference for it. And so in terms of why have a day, it's like everybody's welcome. We want everybody to know they're welcome. And everybody's going through things, but I guess sort of relating to part of what Kara said, it's not so much that the not first gen law school students know people with all the answers. And we're not necessarily saying that, but I think it is the case that if you don't have anybody that you already know who's been through it, you don't actually even know what the questions to ask are. Like you don't even have a frame of reference for what is it that I'm supposed to be. And then just like simple vocabulary things like, that are sort of freighted with other information, like what are office hours? What does that mean? Can I go to them? Am I supposed to go to them? I am allowed to go to them. And should I stay away from it? Or should I not bother with the professor during office hours? Or is that, I got to law school not having any idea what an outline, everybody was talking about outlines. I had no idea what outlines were about. Sort of the significance of, all those things. And I think there's a tendency to feel like there's a risk for coming to law school and feeling like everybody else knows what they're doing. Whether or not that's accurate or not, I think there's often that feeling. And I think that can be especially acute if you are also coming from a background where you don't have anything to refer to.
Well, let's dispel that myth. Nobody actually knows what they're doing, it turns out. Like, I mean, I have learned this. At some point, I realized I'm probably an adult because I'm like over 40 years old and have a steady job and a terminal degree and a kid. So I'm like probably an adult. And, I look around and there's a lot of people who don't seem to know what they're doing. But, maybe first gen don't as much notice that or aren't aware of that because they don't have the professionals in their life who are also family members who are, open about that. You mentioned the lawyer in the pinstripe suit, the suit of armor or the billboard. I mean, that might be an icon of a lawyer that people see because in your community, you see the lawyer who's on the side of the bus or on the TV ad during halftime or what have you, but you don't necessarily see, trademark lawyers, or you don't necessarily see corporate attorneys or law professors, right? And you don't kind of know what that looks like. Uh, Cassandra, can you kind of speak more to what your perspective of lawyers was like? What was your beginnings here? You mentioned a couple things about your family, and I'd love to hear more about it. Like, what was the environment you grew up in? Can you say, kind of speaking to kind of what Ed spoke to, what your perception of lawyers was, and then how did you make a decision to pursue a career in law after what was it that gave you the insight that, this is something that I fit in, and I can do?
It's a great question. So if you don't have lawyers in the family or you don't have lawyers around you, there is sort of this veil in front of them or this rarefied sense that you have that they are up there. They're these special people. And if you don't have that experience around you, you don't know what lawyers actually do. They're just these special rarefied people to the side that in fact, I don't know about other students, but as a first generation lawyer for my first year or two in law school, I had a very difficult time even imagining I would be a lawyer one day. So there I was in law school, hardly able to conceive of the idea that I might actually be a real lawyer. And it took time. It took law school and a few years of practice before I understood it's essentially a trade. It's not that there aren't scholarly elements to it, and certainly there are, but you are learning how to do a job. And if you had known that from the beginning, maybe it wouldn't have been so frightening. But because it felt like I was entering an entirely different world that was not meant for me, it was initially very frightening and intimidating, which I think can be common with students who don't have those role models around them or that experience with the law to even know what they do.
And you don't have to wear a pinstripe suit.
And you don't have to wear a pinstripe suit.
Kara, and I think our next topic will be dealing with some of those misconceptions, because I'm hearing that bubble up in our conversation. And Kara, maybe you'll lead us into that. But first, can you share a little more about your story and about what was your perception of lawyers growing up in your family and your environment? And then what was it for you that got you into the law and that helped you overcome some of these challenges, which, maybe you shared, maybe you didn't, but I'm hearing about misconceptions, self-doubt, a lack of available mentors, less access to guidance, peers that aren't necessarily on that same track. Can you say more about what your environment was like and then how you got from there to here?
Yeah, I mean, so I didn't really have a good concept about what lawyers did growing up. I mean, I probably saw some movies and I saw some litigators on TV. But the reason I even started thinking about law was there were two things. One, when I was in 8th grade, we had to anonymously indicate what we thought our classmates were going to be when they grew up. And this was some kind of fun activity we did. And a very close friend of mine put that she thought I was going to be a lawyer. And at the time, I was kind of offended because I did not want to be a lawyer. And I was like, does she even know me? I want to be an engineer or an architect, obviously. And I remember kind of being upset that I felt like my friend didn't know me well enough to have pegged the proper career path for me. But turns out she actually knew me better than I probably knew myself. But later, I was thinking more about getting into politics because I had a very healthy, I think, distrust for decisions that were being made and imposed on people in life just generally. As a person who grew up with a family that struggled, like I wanted to have more of a say. And so I thought about maybe running for office one day and going into politics. And somebody in my life told me, oh, a lot of politicians start out by going to law school. And so that's where it sort of started prompting me to think about law school. At the time, I can honestly say I didn't really know a whole lot about what lawyers did or how they spent their days. So I went to college thinking about law school, and then I worked after to try to figure out what I really wanted to do. And then I was in a job where I felt like I wasn't challenged enough sort of mentally, and I needed something harder to do for work. And the only real way to get a harder job or to advance in the job I was in was to go back to school anyway. And I, again, still didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, but I heard law school was challenging. And I thought, like, oh, that's something I should try to take on because I like a good challenge. So I went to law school knowing it was hard and thinking it would be hard. And that's why I went, which is kind of weird. But so I think because of that, I kind of embraced that part of it. Um, and the hardness of it wasn't the part that was the most challenging for me. It really was more not the unknown, not knowing what I was supposed to be doing, what classes I should be taking, what kind of summer jobs I should be looking for, and how to really figure out what kind of lawyer you want to be. I had no idea how to do that. Um, and so that was kind of, I guess, my path there. Um, and I don't have a good I didn't have trademarks like Ed. I was just like, I just want to do something, and I want a better job and a better life and opportunity. And so that's kind of what brought me there.
I wonder if
Now,
are all
now
of
that we,
us like returning students that did you all go to the law school right out of college?
Yeah.
No, neither did I. And I wonder if that's a feature of first generation lawyers. That you don't take the same straight trajectory that others with lawyers in the family or other people who've passed through the education system might do.
What was your undergrad, by the way? Because, I do have the perception that, so I can speak to not being first gen, and my parents had the perspective that you go to college, get a general liberal arts degree, and then you will obviously go on to grad school, right? I mean, obviously, right? Because that's what happened in my family. So just go and study English or whatever, go find yourself for 4 years at a state school, maybe do some protesting or, go to some football games. But first gen students that I speak to tend to be more practical and tend to see the value of education in terms of what it costs them because they're not working and putting money towards it. So we can find some numbers, but just anecdotally, I wonder, what was your undergrad degree, Cassandra? And I wonder if that's a common reason that you actually did something. Because you know what you get to do with an English degree? Go to grad school. So those are my options. Cassandra, what did you do for your undergrad?
That's an interesting perspective. It was not practical. I went to theater arts. So I went into school having no idea I went to college having no idea and no sense of how to plan or decide what I should be. I was really kind of all over the place. So I did theater because it seemed like it'd be great to be a famous actor. So I did theater, and like an English degree, it's about as useful. And kind of worked my way. I was a secretary for many, many years, and worked through various jobs until I realized that I wanted to do more. But I think that's another function of not having someone to emulate, is you just sort of I kept trying different things and if it wasn't satisfying, and I get this from my father, I would think, what do I need to change? What do I need to do differently? How can I move forward? And then I eventually found my way to law school, but it took a long time and a lot of different jobs. And I don't even know how I want to call them careers, but a lot of different jobs and directions before I found law school down the line. It was just not something I saw in the future.
And
I might.
yeah,
Go ahead.
I do want to know. I want to ask you, what was your major? Because I'm curious, but then absolutely follow on that, please.
So I majored in all the things as an undergraduate. I didn't know. I started off as undergraduate thinking maybe pre-med until we dissected the shark, and then I was out of that. That had to reassess my entire worldview. But I just wanted to add that a theater degree, and then working as a secretary for a while. Incidentally, it's like perfect trademark law preparation. It's like the absolute that you couldn't have designed it any better than that. I think it's worth noting that there's a little bit of in addition to the sort of not knowing some of the things, like there's the kind of power of this narrative. You said, like in your family, like, people went to undergrad, and then just, of course, the story was the natural narrative. The natural next thing was that, of course, you were going to go to grad school. So if you don't already have that as a narrative that you're kind of following along, I think it's worth recognizing when you start law school, it's not 100% that you're going to finish. It's a pretty daunting thing. It's a pretty big thing. And there can be some moments where you're sort of kind of holding your breath. Like, is this going to fall apart. So I think that's another thing to notice to just sort of try to bolster folks who don't have any references that they can see in their lives for law school. It's like, yes, it's fine to have those doubts. It's fine to have that uncertainty, but you can make it. You borrow some of our narrative a little bit. Like we can make this work in this, and you similarly the narrative of the sort of confidence to get to the end and not necessarily say, okay, now I got it all figured out. It's like, okay, well, I got a law degree, passed the bar, and I'm very tired. That was great, but also maybe in a sense, that's just the beginning of now being able to figure out what you're doing. Like you don't have to have it all figured out before you even apply to law school.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I still don't have it figured out. So hopefully you don't have to have it figured out before law school. Kara, since you have it all figured out, Kara, no, I'm kidding. Kara, let me actually switch to some of these misconceptions, because I think I hear some interest in the audience of kind of doing a couple things, which we can do today, which are providing some of these models where students can say, oh, you know what, my path is kind of like Ed, kind of like Cassandra, kind of like Kara, and I see how I could become like them one day, because now I see someone who looks like what I might be when I grow up. But in order to get there, you got to get through a lot of obstacles, and Ed put it this way, that not only do you not have access to the answers, you don't have access to the questions. What are some questions, Kara, that first generation students might benefit from knowing exist? What are some questions worth asking that maybe we could answer today that first generation students might not even think to ask?
I think, what can you do with a law degree is one. Like, what are the different jobs that you have as a lawyer? How do you get to those jobs? What kind of skills should you be focusing on if there's a particular type of law you want to practice or a particular type of job you want to have? Are there classes that you should take? Are there, internships that you should be, or externships that you should be looking to get experience in? Should you be networking with certain individuals? If so, who are they? And where do you find those people? What are the resources at your law school that you can rely on to have more assistance with asking and answering these questions? That was one of the things that I think I didn't really do, is lean on the resources at my school and reach out to the people who were there. I really relied on my peers, and I think I probably could have benefited quite a bit from the experienced professionals in the building who had law degrees. So I think, those are some of the questions that come to mind.
Let's answer some of those, and then we'll put a couple more on the table. So who are these experienced professionals in the building? I don't know. Ed, what are some of the resources at law schools that are available to first gen students? Are there any that you utilized during your time as a law student? Are there any that UNH offers that you would like to advise about?
So, in addition to not having examples for people who went to law school, we also had 2 babies when I was in law school. So I wasn't spending a lot of extra time at the law school. I'm not sure I would really, it worked out well for us, but that's not highly advisable. I think one beautiful thing about UNH is that the size, that we're not so tiny that that we don't have very many options, but we're not so big that you're completely lost. So I would hope that we are at a size where, and certainly everybody I know is just completely open to communication. Like I said, office hours is sort of the stereotypical thing, like, hey, you can contact during office hours. But I hope that we're reachable in other ways as well. And I think that's, if you're able to do that, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be directly like the professor that you have for this course this semester. It can be somebody who you've had previously. It can be a different professor. It can be, I think, libraries. I've always felt like libraries are hugely underutilized resources. Simply the physical space is a lovely thing, but all of the additional questions that you can have not only answered, but energetically answered, and can point you in the direction of other questions to ask. I think all of these things we've got a pretty good mix, but I mean, it does feel like there's a bit of a responsibility on our end, on the school side of it, to just recognize that not everybody is coming in with the same sort of template in mind, or with any template in mind. And I think the more, in a sense, the more inclusive we might frame it as, oh, we need to be inclusive of these other people. But I think we actually end up making our teaching better if we pause for a moment and just do the classic law thing of think, who are we talking to? What are the other perspectives we can consider here? And then taking those perspectives into account. And, just like sometimes that's just as simple as making explicit what the expectations are, or making explicit what the structure is, or what the timeline is, or, we're halfway through the semester now and let's be doing these kinds of things. Like it doesn't have to be super fancy necessarily to, I think, I feel like that would help people whether they were first generation or not.
Yeah, I mean, Ed, I hear you, and to emphasize that, I think there's a Jewish principle that we talk about at the Seder. We identify there are 4 different sons, or children, but we really mean 4 different kind of categories of people. And one of those is the one who does not know how to ask. What do you do for him? You must open up the conversation for him. Right? That is the obligation one has to the person who does not know how to ask, is to open up the conversation. Cassandra, how does UNH open up this conversation? What more should we be doing to create space for people to discover these questions? Or, if you'd like to go there as well, what are some resources now? I mean, I think this conversation can be helpful to some people because we're putting some things on the table. But what are some of the conversations you would open up for people who may not know what to ask?
I think, so I'm thinking about your different questions there. What are some of the things that UNH offers? I do love the fact that initially we set up new students with faculty mentors that can then be there to answer questions through the course of their law school career. I think that's really helpful to have that one person you can go to ask a question, find a direction, share a problem that they're struggling with. So I think that's really valuable. I think one underutilized resource is their peers. I think there's a real value in law school of finding your people, which isn't easy to do, but to find your people, not only for your time in law school, but also for your time outside of law school. Your colleagues at law school can be a really vibrant and very helpful network when you leave. And I think developing and maintaining those relationships is a treasure. I was not always good at maintaining. I was good at making relationships. I wasn't always good at maintaining relationships. And then I've been through a period where I reestablished those relationships because I realized later how valuable they really were. So for students who are here, not just the first generation students, but particularly for first generation students, to find their peers at the law school that they can draw support from, work with, learn from, draw each other through the process. They can learn so much from the people around them.
I love that we ended up on, doing common scholarship, because here again, another lesson this is Pirkei Avos 1:6, which reads, make for yourself a teacher, find for yourself a friend, right? That is one of our sage wisdoms here. And, I heard that echoed with what Kara was saying around how her peers really helped her discover. And, Kara, you told the story about how one of your peers basically discovered your inner lawyer. So I want to come back to maybe some of those stories and some of those experiences. Do you have an experience, Kara, from law school where a peer made a meaningful difference in helping guide you so that some of the students can maybe kind of understand or make more concrete how this importance of making for yourself a friend is not just important, but maybe particularly important for people that don't have these other mentors built into their life?
Yeah, I mean, I actually got my job that I had, my 2L summer, my summer associate position at a law firm, I got through a peer. It was somebody who was on the law journal with me, and I hadn't really gotten on the ball about applying for jobs. I had gone through the normal OCI big firm circuit, and that really wasn't my thing, and I couldn't figure out why. I just didn't feel like I cared a whole lot about um, what the lawyers did at their firms, and I couldn't see how I fit in them. It just didn't feel like my place. And so then I didn't really know what to do with myself after I realized that. I didn't know where to go. And I had someone who was on the law journal with me, and the firm that he was at was more of a mid-sized firm in Boston that did different things. They did some transactional law and they did litigation, and so it had a nice variety. And he had been there over the summer and had said they were looking for summer associates, and if I was interested, he could pass along my resume. And so I did that, and that is how I got that position. Because I, again, didn't properly utilize the career services office or the other resources that were available to me, but I was able to get my first 2L summer job that way. And that was a huge help to me. And he continued to be a mentor to me throughout my time. He was a year ahead of me in law school.
Sounds kind of like networking, just with shared things. So, Kara, I want to stick with this for a second. Just what is Law Journal? Maybe some people aren't familiar with it. What is the Law Journal, and why is it something worth pursuing? What was that experience for you? And I don't know, maybe just explain it a little bit for some people that aren't familiar with the term.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're somewhat how you get on to the journal and all that may be different at each school. At my school, it was something that you had to apply for over the summer after your 1L year, and you had to be within a certain percentage of your class rank to be able to submit an application, and you had to write something to get on. But then once you were selected onto the journal, it was, editing. So a lot of editing the articles that were going to be published in the journal that people had submitted, different scholars. And we called it site checking. So we had site checking hours that we had to do each week where we just checked sites and edited work. And then we were also writing a piece that was of publishable quality. And so I wrote a note when I was in law school. And so what I would say is that was one of the best experiences I had in law school, was being part of the journal that I was on. When I was my people, I had this group of people that I spent a lot of time with very regularly. We had similar interests. We were site checking together and coming up with article topics. And I really loved the topic of my note. And so it was something that I did a very deep dive in. And it was a subject that was in active litigation, so it was regularly changing and things were happening all the time. So that was kind of exciting. But I really learned how to be a much better writer, and I really learned how to edit my own work after learning how to edit other people's work. And it made me so much better at recognizing my own errors in my own writing and how to be a more concise writer. And so that was it was just great for me. And it was also an area where I could take on a leadership role in law school. I ended up becoming the editor-in-chief my third year of law school of my journal. And then I was able to kind of discover what it's like to be in charge of something important and meaningful, and how to kind of coordinate that while also being a law student. It kind of tracks where I like to overcommit myself. And so I've started out pretty young and continued to do that through law school. But I met some great friends who I stay in touch with to this day through that experience.
Now you
have?
Or Ed, yeah, I'll go. Good, Ed.
I was just going to say, now you got to tell us what the subject of what the article was about there. Now I'm on the edge of my seat.
Yeah. So back in the day when I was in law school, it was during the Iraq War, and there were a number of detainees at Guantanamo Bay for different reasons. My particular note focused on the Uyghur population. There were a number of Uyghur Muslims who were unlawfully detained in Guantanamo Bay. And the U.S. government had determined that they were not war criminals, that they had not done anything wrong, but they couldn't return them to China because they would be persecuted there. They were fleeing China when they got caught up in the whole, I'll save all the details. I could talk about this for hours, but they ended up there. And the whole issue was whether or not, what should we do? And what should the U.S. government do? And should they be released? And if so, where should they go? And so I argue that the U.S. government needed to take care of them and give them a place here in the United States for them to survive. And there was some ongoing litigation at the time. There were some cases in federal court about their detention and what rights they had. And it was a moving target. So that was my piece. It kind of covered a little bit of immigration, asylum, rights based stuff. It was very interesting.
Wow. Ed, do you have experiences where your peers made an impact on your success in law school? A story or a tangible note, or was it more about being a parent, and was there maybe on the flip side of that, if you were not able to participate in that, you could speak to some of the challenges around balancing that.
Yeah, I think in our case, it was more the support was family support. It takes a lot of hands with one or two little ones running around and trying to do law school. So that I think it was more the community and larger community of people who even allowed me the luxury of continuing through law school at that point in time. That was really where we felt supported, I think. And that's also another. It ended up. It very much felt at the end like, okay, this is great. We all kind of did this. It wasn't like, oh, I did that one thing myself. I isolated. It's like, no, nice work, everybody.
Who came to your graduation?
Yeah, well, a bunch of folks. And we, in fact, actually, so the backstory is being obsessed with trademarks before going to law school. The first place I found out about was UNH. And I was like, okay, well, we obviously got to go there. But we were in North Carolina and we were expecting our first child, and we had no family support in New Hampshire. So we stayed in North Carolina, attended school there with many family members around us. And I think that ended up being a smart move.
Cassandra, is there anyone that comes to your mind when you think of people you're really grateful for who provided you that support, whether that was a friend or someone in your family? You can say thank you to them now on this podcast, by the way, if you'd like. And I guess if we can, I mean, if there's someone who has this, you can pipe up next, or I'll move on. But I think that when I get to go to graduation, I experience the families and the joy that families have when they have all collaborated in someone's graduation, especially a first generation person. It really does feel like a family matter, and a huge source of pride. Is that something you experienced?
I think one of the biggest supporters when I was in law school was actually a mentor that I had at law school, a scholar that I studied under, who was a refugee rights and immigration and asylum scholar. And she ended up being a real mentor for me overall. And I'm particularly grateful for having been able to work with her. I was very separate from my family, that we were on two different coasts. It was very difficult for them to really be a part of it. They were in California, I was in Boston. So other than keeping them up to date, it was difficult for them to participate in that experience.
Next question is, related to our advice column section. So, I want to put we had Kara listed off a number of questions that people maybe don't even have yet. And I'd like to put a few more on the table in the time that we have, and then try to get a couple more answers out there. Cassandra, I want to just stay with you for a moment here as we think through other questions or questions that maybe are really relevant, like the idea of opening up a conversation by presenting questions that are okay to ask, or putting some questions out there, and then the panel can try to answer some of them, and then we'll come back to everyone to see if we have some final advice or some suggestions that are some takeaways. Cassandra, are there other questions that you think first generation students might not even know to ask that you would like to put out there, and we can maybe even try to sort a little bit? Anything that Kara said that you would highlight, or any answers from questions that were raised earlier you'd like to take the opportunity to bring up?
Yeah. I think for some students, particularly, and again, if they haven't been surrounded by the law prior to coming, won't really have a sense of whether they should, whether they need to, and then how to make a plan for their future work. How do they find what they want to do? How do they define it? How do they find their path? Because I think it's not uncommon for returners to college, but also first generation students to have a clear view of where they want to go. I think we tend to wander a little bit until it finds us. So finding someone that can help you identify the things that you like most, the lifestyle you would like to live, and then how to get there, how to craft it and how to get there. I think that is something that people from outside the usual path will struggle with. So for example, you said yourself, you went to college, your family already just assumed you were going to go on to graduate school. If you're not surrounded by that expectation, you don't necessarily have the tools to put that path together. And so that, and you may not even know that that's something you should be doing. You're just doing what's in front of you. You go to class, you do well, you take your exams, you study. You're just going from one step to the next and not looking further into the future. And sometimes you don't know that that's what you need to be doing as well. And you don't have the tools to put that together. At least that's something that I felt was missing. If I were to do it over again, going back into law school, college is a little different. Going back into law school, I think I would have looked for more resources and help and tools to make a plan rather than just drifting through law school and doing whatever until I found what I liked. It took me a really long time to get to trademarks. I wish I'd found it sooner because I do love it. But I didn't know I would love it. And I didn't know how to find that. And I didn't know how to chart that path.
Yeah, I mean, Ed will, I'm sure, agree that everyone should simply do trademarks, and that would be the way to make sure that you have a successful, happy life, right? It's just pursue trademarks, and that'll be the easy one-liner for today. Ed, let's talk about some advice that you'd give from what you heard today. So we opened up some questions. We talked about a couple stories. And if you could imagine that there was a student came into your office and said, I heard your podcast. I heard you on the podcast, Ed, Professor Timberlake, and your story resonated with me. I have these features that are similar. I'm not sure I want to do trademarks, but I don't know. I don't even know what to ask. What do you do with that situation? What's the advice you'd give when you might have a couple hundred people like that listening to this? Where would you start? What would the advice that you give?
So sort of maybe coming from the other side, from what Cassandra was referencing, that I think one thing that's that I would encourage people to have the confidence to recognize is that, we talk about law school and we talk about learning the law. It just sort of, it's okay to recognize the fiction of, there is no one law where we don't learn the law. We literally are making the law by doing what we're doing. And so I think if you don't have a straight path, or maybe if you've mapped out a straight path, maybe that's somebody else's path, like that doesn't necessarily have to be your path. And maybe that path is going to make you miserable. So, and it's hard, I think, if you're feeling like you're lacking some support, it can probably be hard to have the confidence to say, I'm not going to do anybody else's version of this. I necessarily am going to be the me of the law. And I think there's room for that. I think the law, and that's part of why we want to let everybody in that we can, like to include everybody in this whole effort, is because we need the law to be bigger and different and individual and, have a theater background and then, secretary experience. And then those are good things. That's not, to my mind, that's not a path that doesn't make sense. That totally makes sense. It just, you kind of have to go through a couple of steps to get there.
Not all who wander are lost, right? I mean, that's not, but it can be scary. It can be very scary, especially if you don't know about that. One thing that came up, and I'm just going to ask that you guys answer this for me as well, which is, so you said, okay, so what you need is to get confidence, to get over your self-doubt. And this is actually not an issue. Turns out that is isolated to first generation students. It turns out that many people, I'm going to raise my hand here as someone who also has self-doubt all the time around whatever I'm pursuing whenever it's new. I do gain confidence over time, but But in this particular context, around this area, is there anything in particular that you could give in terms of advice about how to derive that confidence? Because that feels to be a really important part of success. Cassandra, is there anything you'd advise students around how to find that escape from the self-doubt loop and to gain confidence?
Yeah, I would. It's funny. I was just listening to a podcast about this the other day. That confidence is trying and giving yourself that congratulations, giving that yourself that grace to recognize you're trying something new. You've never done it before, and you're allowed to be new at it. You're allowed to be terrible at it. But the very fact that you have the courage to try something new and to do it and keep rolling forward is your confidence. That's where your confidence is born. If you will congratulate yourself by having the guts to do it in the first place, I think some confidence can come from that very thing. If you're already great, if it comes easily to you, what have you accomplished? If you already know how to do it, what have you accomplished? But if this is new to you and you don't know what you're doing and you're bouncing off the walls on occasion, trying to find your way down the hallway, the fact that you have the courage to keep stepping forward and going into the unknown, that's something to be very proud of.
And that kind of resilience seems pretty beneficial in lawyering too, because once you get through law school, I have not found that ends. In fact, spoiler alert, after law school, you get a career in law. And it turns out that those paths aren't always well trod either. Kara, do you have some perspectives on kind of overall advice that you would want people to hear, either along these lines or on the new line? What is some advice that maybe you got or that you would give to students who are, really thinking about whether or not to pursue law school or having either whether it's self-doubt or self-confidence, how do you charge forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think I 100% agree with what Cassandra said. I think, you have to try different things to really get a sense about what you are good at and what you like to do. And I think that, everything takes practice and you sometimes have to try things more than once. I think it's similar advice that I give my daughter who doesn't like to eat anything that I make her right now is this, it's like, you're going to try it multiple times before you tell me you don't actually like this. And I think sometimes a lot of students might say like, oh, I don't want to do litigation because it seems scary and it makes me nervous about the idea of speaking in public or in front of people. And I get nervous about it. But sometimes I see those same students trying it a few times and then realizing they actually really quite enjoyed coming up with the argument and preparing for it and then doing it. And it was nerve-wracking because it was new and it was different. And it was something they didn't necessarily see themselves doing, but maybe they're quite good at it. And so I think also kind of playing to the things that you do know that you are good at. As a new lawyer, it's like everything is intimidating and everything is new and different and hard. But if you can play to the things that you know you're good at, for me, it was like I was really good at preparing and knowing my case front and back. And so I could rely on that when I went into court and know that I read through the whole file. I prepared every argument. I did everything that I needed to do to be well equipped to represent the client, knowing that I had no idea what was going to happen when I walked in the doors and what questions I was going to be asked. But at least I was prepared. And so I would rely on that to then help me build my confidence. And over time, I realized that being prepared was actually a huge part of the job. And so while it was something that I felt I was good at, it was also very necessary. And so, it's just kind of trying new things and being willing to try new things. And to ask for feedback along the way. If you try something that you've never done before, if you've, drafted a document or you had a difficult client interaction, ask for feedback from whoever was there to observe and to see your work, and give you some tips on how to improve the next time. And the more you do that, the more comfortable you are with getting that feedback. And I think the less scary it is when you're getting it. And so, that's my advice is to try all the things, and really see what you like, because what you're good at and what you like might be two different things. But if you practice the thing that you like enough, eventually you'll get good at it.
That's amazing advice, Kara. It really is. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think
Does it apply to Brussels
really,
sprouts?
Does it apply to Brussels sprouts?
I just love Brussels sprouts.
Yes, you do have to. You have to roast them just right. Seth will help you out. No, I if I can build on that for a moment, I think what Kara said is absolutely spot on. Take the thing that you like, even if you're not good at it, and keep trying, and you'll get good at it. I think being willing and courageous enough to try something new can also be your superpower. I love trying new stuff. I will try anything, even if I know nothing about it. And it became sort of my brand when I was in private practice. If something came in the door and they were like, "Oh, how do we do this? I don't know. They'd go around. Who knows how to do it? Ask Cassandra. She'll figure it out." And I love doing that. And then I would dig in and dig in and dig in until I really knew it. Like Kara, I prepared to death. So how I got into trademarks. Somebody left the firm. Nobody knew how to do it. Ask Cassandra. She'll figure it out. And that's exactly how I became a trademark lawyer. And lo and behold, I became a lawyer in an area that I absolutely loved. So being willing to try something new that I knew absolutely nothing about, and being willing to dig in and trust yourself to figure that out. Trust yourself that you will get it. You will get it. Keep trying, you'll get it. And if you can do that, you can find these wonderful new places that you didn't know you'd find yourself.
On the outside, looking into this conversation too, it sure seems to me that by definition, first-gen students are doing something new. That's the definition. If there's one definition to sort of circle back. So if you're a first-gen student listening to this, you're already doing this. You're already engaging in something which was new. And that shows you have that fundamental capability, which can be a kind of superpower. Ed, do you have any kind of final thoughts before we kind of conclude around things that you heard today? Any takeaways, and I'll kind of go around, see if anyone has any concluding thoughts here, but, what about this impacted you, and, or do you own a pinstripe suit?
I do not own in fact, actually, so we did have one guy growing up in the neighborhood who had like the suspenders and the striped shirts and everything. And I remember when I was growing up thinking he was a lawyer. I think he actually was a banker, it turns out. It didn't even have a law reference. I think just I would hope that everybody would get the message that they belong, that they are, everybody is welcome here. And we need everybody to be here to make both the legal education experience, but also the law better. Also, I think just worth remembering, I'm not sure how many people, I understand if you're first generation to law school, it can feel a little isolating, but I'm not sure how terribly well prepared anybody is for the first year of law school. I mean, it is deeply disorienting, no matter, even if you have people, even if somebody's handing you outlines, it's still a very strange kind of experience. But I think that the recognition that it goes kind of both ways, that we're better, that not only do you belong here, but the whole thing is better with you here. So,
Kara, do you have any kind of takeaway closing thoughts about words of encouragement, or kind of closing thoughts around what we talked about today?
Sure. I think it's important to remember that lawyers are people too. And we don't just come at the law and at law practice with some certain type of pedigree or background. Like, you're bringing your whole person to your job, and your experiences that you've had and the upbringing you've had. And sometimes, like, not having lawyers in your life can be such a benefit, because you might have a better understanding of what your clients are going through. You might be better equipped to talk to clients because you're not used to using big legal words to talk to your family and your friends. And there's so much that people bring from their own personal lives that is just, can be an asset in all different ways, whether it's connecting with clients, or, running a firm, or being a business owner or manager, just working with people. Understanding what clients are going through when they're going through difficult and stressful experiences. All of those things are super important as a lawyer, and as somebody coming to law school who doesn't know lawyers or have them in their lives, that's okay. You can still be really good at being a lawyer and you can bring so much to the practice. And that diversity of perspective and backgrounds makes the practice of law and the law itself just better anyway. And so I think it's just important for people to remember that we are better when we are diverse.
Cassandra, you get the last word, save my outro. So your takeaway advice to capstone our conversation today, anything you'd want to share that really brings this conversation together for our listeners?
I'd love to echo what both Ed and Kara said, both that yes, you belong, and that even if you feel like you're different or outside of, there's no one, we're not a monolith, there is no one lawyer, but also remember that you don't have to be a lawyer when you graduate either. There may be other things that you can apply your legal education to. What's most important is that you're growing and you're learning and you're developing your way of thinking. And if you find that the law, that practicing as a lawyer isn't your thing and your thing might be something else, then what you learned in law school is still going to apply to that and make you better at that thing. So there's no need for us all to be uniform. There's no need for us all to be doing the same thing or thinking in the same way or pursuing the same thing. It's all of great value.
Well, thanks for all of that advice. And thank you all for listening to Organized, the Business Law Breakdown. I heartfeltly thank all of you, Ed Timberlake, Kara Simard, and Cassandra Larae-Perez, for spending your time, your stories, your insights, your advice. This conversation was in honor of First Generation College Students Day, which will come up on November 8th, 2024. And I hope it reminds everyone of the resilience and power of those who paved their own path in education and in particular in the legal profession. So whether you're a student, an attorney, or just interested in the field of law, I hope today's episode inspired and encouraged you to think about the importance of diversity in education and how we all play a role in supporting future generations. Please note that opinions and views expressed during this podcast are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the University of New Hampshire Franklin Pierce School of Law. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. And please tune in for future episodes where we'll continue to explore crucial issues in business law. Until next time, I'm Seth C. Oranburg, and this is Organized, the Business Law Breakdown. Thank you for listening.